Hello? 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 Hi, I'm James. I think I'm your 11 o'clock. Thanks for seeing me on such short notice. Well, if you don't mind, I think I'd rather stand. I'm kind of all nerves, you know, and I can't really sit still. I had this event, this circumstance, this thing that happened yesterday that really has me off my game. I'm questioning really, my entire life. What was the event? Well, you see, my older brother dropped in on us yesterday at home, which I know doesn't sound all that unusual, but you need to kind of understand that my brother and I really haven't spoken in almost 2 years, and then of course there's the fact that he died 4 days ago, and when I say that he dropped in on us, I mean he kind of literally dropped in. I mean, there was no knock at the door. 1 minute he wasn't there, and the next minute there he is, standing in the middle of our kitchen. And I know, I know how this sounds. I mean, but he was really there. I mean, I talked with him. I shook his hand. My wife and kids, they saw him too, and I've come to understand over the last few hours that quite a lot of people actually have seen him. And I had to say, I mean, he looked remarkably good, especially being dead and all. I mean, he looked better than I remembered him looking. He still had the scarring in his hands and his feet. Did I mention he'd been crucified? That might be important. Yeah, he was crucified, and then he shows up at my house, and I'm not sure what to do with that. So I thought I probably needed to talk to somebody about it. Excuse me? What was our relationship like? Well, I mean, I guess since we really hadn't spoken in 2 years, you could say it had its ups and downs. Hilly, maybe, rocky at times. I mean, I had to say, when we were little, we actually were quite close. We were the oldest of 7 kids. Jesus, he was the oldest, and then me. And then there was Miriam, our sister, and then Joey, and Simon, and then little Susie, and our baby brother Jude. But when we were young, you know, Jesus and I used to go around the house every so often and gather up all the stuff that we had grown out of or we weren't using anymore, and Mom would take us in town, and we would give the stuff away to people who needed it. And that was really cool. In fact, that's one of the reasons I don't really go to the synagogue much anymore. I mean, that place is just filled with hypocrites that it used to just make me so angry. I would go to synagogue on the Sabbath, and we would all be there, and we would all hear the same scripture. We would hear the word of God, and yet during the week, I'd be out in the marketplace, and the way that they would speak to each other, and the way that they would treat one another, and that there were some people that I know, they had nice houses. They had plenty of food and clothing, but then they would run into their neighbors who were struggling. Some of them were living on the streets. And they would be pleasant. They'd say, hey, good to see you. Have a great day. Stay warm, well fed. We'll be praying for you. But they wouldn't actually do anything. And that just made me so angry. And of course, Jesus would pull me aside and he'd say, James, jelly. That's what he'd call me. That's another long story. But he'd say, Jelly, you've got 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. Maybe you need to be quicker to listen and to actually hear people and hear their stories and get to understand them a little more before you engage your mouth and you start talking. And maybe if you did that, you wouldn't get so angry all the time. And he'd say, you have to understand, Jelly, that people, they don't really know what they're doing. It's like they live in the darkness and they're just stumbling around, groping, and they really just, they don't have a clue. And you have to forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Plus, you're not going to change them with your anger. I mean, think about it. The reality is you can't change a person anyway. The only way they're going to change is if God gets a hold of them and changes their heart and changes them from the inside out. But Jelly, they'll never meet God if all they ever see of him is your anger. Well, thank you for that. I know that he was right, but that just made me more angry. So yes, it's been kind of up and down. I mean, it's not easy to be Jesus' brother. I mean, he's good at everything. I mean, things seem to come so easily to him. I mean, he was so smart in school. In fact, he could answer every one of the teacher's questions. And then he would ask them questions that they couldn't answer. And man, as a carpenter, I mean, he was amazing. The things that he could do. But it's hard. It's hard to grow up in his shadow. And there were times when I had to admit, I wish I didn't have an older brother. I mean, there was this one time, our family would go down to Jerusalem about 3 times a year for the big festivals, and there was this one time we were all going down to Jerusalem. In fact, pretty much most of our town was all going down to Jerusalem, and we went down and we did the festival, and we were getting ready to go home, and Jesus, he comes up to me and he says, Jelly, I'm going up to the temple for a few minutes. Tell Mom and Dad where I am, and then you can pick me up there on the way home. Yeah, about that. Well, I'm not really sure if I really thought that I was getting rid of him. It was really probably more that I was just trying to get him angry. But I didn't tell Mom and Dad where he was. In fact, when they came and asked me if I knew where he was, I said, well, he's probably hanging out with James and John. They were our cousins. My mother's sister is Aunt Sal, and she married Uncle Zebedee, and they had James and John. They were our cousins. And man, they loved Jesus. Man, as kids, they practically worshiped him. So it really wasn't a big surprise that they ended up being part of his band of merry wackos. Now, Andrew really wasn't a surprise either. Now, Peter, that was a shocker. I didn't think that Peter was really a joiner. Certainly didn't think he'd be following anybody, but I'm sorry, what was I talking about? Oh yeah. So Mom and Dad bought it. And we all left, headed back home. And it wasn't until that night, because it's a couple days' journey walking, we were making camp, and that's when Mom discovered that, Jesus wasn't with us. Yeah, I think pretty much Jesus could have heard her scream back in Jerusalem. I've never seen her quite so terrified. I mean, she just went white. And so we packed back up and headed back to Jerusalem. Aunt Sal and Uncle Deb and their kids, they went with us. And when we finally got back to Jerusalem, we were all going to split up and go every which direction. And that's when I sort of nonchalantly said to my dad, Dad, you know how Jesus likes to hang out at the synagogue back home? Do you think maybe he might have gone to the temple? Well, he thought that was a great idea. So we all headed up to the temple, and sure enough, there was Jesus, surrounded by a bunch of priests. It looked kind of funny because it was like there was a class going on, and Jesus, 12 years old, was teaching. Well, Mom ran right up to him, was crying and hugging on him, and she says to him, Jesus, why didn't you let us know? Well, I was pretty sure my goose was cooked at that point. But then, Jesus glanced at me and then turned back to Mom and said, Mother, didn't you know that I would be in my Father's house? That I would be about my Father's business? I always thought that was a little weird. Dad was with us. But she didn't get mad. And he didn't get angry. What a waste. Now, it's not like he never got in trouble. Although even when he did get in trouble, it seems like it was always for the right reasons. I remember there's this one time he came home from school, and he was bruised, and his nose was bloody, and his shirt was ripped. And it was pretty obvious he'd been in some sort of a fight. Well, again, my mother looked more horrified than angry. And I'm not really sure whether you could say that he got in trouble. It was kind of like he got grounded. They certainly kept a much closer eye on him for a few weeks. When I was talking to him later, I found out what really happened. See, he'd been walking home from school that day, and there was a group of boys picking on a smaller kid, a kid named Lazarus. He was kind of pale and sickly, kind of a bookworm. He was an easy target. And apparently Jesus had stepped in and said, hey, if you want to pick on somebody, why don't you pick on me? Well, Jesus wasn't a small guy. I'm pretty sure he could have taken him, but he never threw a punch. He let them beat on him until they decided it really wasn't any fun anymore, and they just walked away. Well, after that, Jesus and Lazarus were pretty much best buddies till Lazarus and his family moved down near Jerusalem. They live near, in Bethany, I think it is. Yeah, we stay with them sometimes when we go down. Yeah, so even when he got in trouble, it was kind of for the right reasons. And Jesus and Mom, they had this, this special bond, this thing between the two of them. And at the minute, I was a little jealous. What? Jealous of who? You mean, was I jealous of Mom or jealous of Jesus? I never really thought about it. I guess I'd kind of like to have that sort of thing with either one of them. So in high school, we kind of drifted apart because Jesus was spending a lot of his time at the synagogue. He was teaching a class there, and in his spare time, that's usually where you could find him. I was pretty much angry most of the time. And then Dad died. And I was sort of shocked that Dad left the business to me. I mean, Jesus was the oldest, but Dad always said, he's an amazing carpenter, but he's got no head for business. He'd give it all away free if it was up to him. Well, I thought that might cause a problem between the two of us, but actually that worked out really well. I mean, for a few years, we really worked together nicely. The business grew, things were going really well. Till about, I guess it's been about 3 years now, Jesus came to me and he said, I'm quitting. What do you mean you're quitting? Yeah, well, I've got another call that I really need to see about. What other call? Well, he says, you know how I've been teaching that class up at the synagogue? Yeah. I said, I've been asked to speak on Sabbath this week, and I'm thinking I might make it a regular gig going around preaching and teaching. I said, that doesn't sound like a plan. That sounds like a terrible idea. Well, he wanted to give it a shot. I said, well, what about the business? He said, well, Joey's ready. He can take my place, and then you can start training Simon. You'll be all right. Well, let me tell you, Joey was not ready, and we were not all right. But he went. That first Sabbath, I went to the synagogue. It had been a while since I'd been there. But I figured I ought to support my big brother. And I figured it was going to be a train wreck. And I wanted to be there to see it. Well, if I was expecting a train wreck, I was not disappointed. He opened that scroll and was reading from Isaiah, that passage about the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, blah, blah, blah. It's supposed to be about the Messiah. Well, he's finished his reading it, and he says, hey, this morning, this has been fulfilled in your hearing. I'm thinking, what is he talking about? You're my brother, dude. What's up? Well, evidently, the congregation did not take kindly to that. And I thought that his ministry was going to end before it had really even begun. But somehow he slipped out and got away. But I went on record then saying, this is not going to end well. Well, then I started hearing all about all these things he was saying and doing. And I thought, somebody has got to stop him. before he hurts himself and before he gets other people hurt. So I got my brothers and sisters together, and we went to Mom. And we said, Mom, you've got to talk some sense into your boy. Well, she didn't want to have any of it, but we kind of twisted her arm. We took her to a place where we knew he was going to be teaching. I got James's attention, and I told him to go tell Jesus that we were there. Well, we're standing at the edge of the crowd, and all of a sudden, I hear Jesus say, before the whole crowd, I'm told that my mother and brothers and sisters are here, but who really are my mother and brothers and sisters? Aren't they whoever does the will of my Father? And then he just goes on teaching. Well, that was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. And I thought, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. If he wants to follow this foolish idea, have at it. But I'm having no part. Well, my mom kept trying to talk me into it. She kept trying to get me to talk to him. And so finally, I told my mother, listen, if this is all you had to say to me, if this is all you want from me, then don't visit anymore. I'm done with you as well. So I really hadn't talked to either of them till last week. My mother came round. She told me what had been going on, that Jesus was back in Jerusalem, that he'd been arrested. She was worried for him. She was crying. And all I could say to her was, I told you this wasn't going to end well. Good luck. Well, I may have said that, but he is my brother. So I went. I was at the edge of the crowd. I saw him drag his cross through the street. I saw him nail him to that cross and raise it up. I saw my mother collapse at the foot of that cross. And I heard my brother say to my cousin John, "Son, behold your mother." Mother, behold your son. I saw them take him down. I saw my mother and my aunt and some other ladies follow him to where they buried him. And I just went home. And then he shows up in my kitchen. What did he say? He said, listen, Jelly, I know this is hard. I know you don't understand what's happening. But if you need wisdom, ask our God, for he is generous. But if you ask him for wisdom, you better have faith. Listen to what he's saying. Because I know it's not going to make sense to you. But you've got to trust. How could he have been standing in my kitchen? I mean, he was just my brother. You know, they say that he predicted the whole thing. That he said that he was going to Jerusalem, that he would die, and on the third day he would be raised again. But how could he be the Messiah? He was just my brother. Oh my God. That's what John was talking about. He was the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And I thought he was just my brother. I've got to go find my mother.